What is the medium for this? Is this
It's digital
Okay.
on Kozo, and then there's offset on
Oh.
top. So like that's why they feel like dirty. They have the oil ink on them.
what parts is offset?
It's a transparent white flat over all of them. So it's just like
Oh,
gone through the offset like with no detail. So they are like flat color.
is it kind of just to bring it back a little bit? Like they used to be a bit more darker or contrasted?
Well, I find when I print full scale digital that, especially on like a washi paper, the like, you get a little bit of the like printer mark, and when I do a layer of like tinted white, or even just transparent over it, it kind of brings the blacks back down to black, especially like one of the darker ones, and like where you can kind of still see when you look close like the printer marks, but then when I like do the layer, I think it just makes it softer and.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, like the books too, like I feel like layering. I don't know where they ended up, but oh here, like I wax them. It was
Wow.
a series of 3, and I don't know where the third one is.
And this was all made from the Snap residency.
These ones were I believe.
Okay.
The prints are, and
Yeah,
then the
okay.
2 larger prints on the dining room table are.
Okay, cool. And do these have the text, or was it just mainly the
No.
ones you shown?
This was the first series without text.
Okay.
That I did, and
Nice.
like ever. It was a little scary for me to like let go of that because I feel like so much of my process is writing. Like I do a lot of like preliminary writing, and
Yeah.
I come up with like the idea from my own writing a lot of the time. So it
Okay.
was weird to not include any words.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I was gonna ask you if you were like a writer, because I noticed a lot of text used in your imagery.
Yeah, I find writing like a really helpful tool to situate my ideas, and then sometimes I use it and sometimes I don't. But I think increasingly I've been really drawn to technology and like
Yeah.
how I use a lot of digital space to create work and like see myself. So I think text is now becoming a little bit more secondary in that
Yeah.
process.
May I ask why you like using very gray, monotone imagery?
Well, this one, it was from a book that I made a long time ago. And it's a collection that I'm still working on where I photograph every ceiling I wake up under. And it was like about that moment of like reflection and thinking about the night before, thinking about where you are, thinking about like that liminal transition. And I think for me, ceilings became kind of a really important part of my process because it would like benchmark an experience or a moment. And then it was my first time working with images in a way that like really were chronological and thinking about it as like a storyboard. So this narrative, like with all 3 books, was like about a really kind of sad moment. And I think like using the ceiling as instead of me kind of being in the space, I found it to be way more effective because then it let me have the words be a little bit more personal. But I like the flat images or the grayer images because I usually shoot 35 millimeter or it's iPhone photography. So the quality sometimes isn't really there. So I find like adding a dither, making them really flat really helps. So like I can be in control of the bad quality in that capacity.
Right. And I guess like bad quality, whatever that may mean, kind of works in your favor sometimes.
Yeah.
Thinking about digital realms.
And especially with like print as a matrix, like having a dither and having a dot on an image, whether that's intentional or from kind of the photographic process, I think like it does make a richer black when you're doing etching and like but
A lot of grays, and then even like specifically with the stuff from Snap where that had text within
Right.
the image, like there was a lot of like moodiness.
Yeah.
Like it felt quite tender and vulnerable, and you're talking about like feeling alienated in certain spaces. What about certain spaces feel or why or how like are certain spaces like anthropomorphized, like you said,
Right.
and like why do you feel alienated in certain spaces? Is it because of that cycle of like shame and desire that you've mentioned in the
Yeah.
past?
For me, it's like the work is really personal, and I think having the spaces inform like me a lot, I guess, is where I find a lot of my research come out. And I think it's never like a direct narrative. Like I don't think about like, that's not, I guess your question to answer it is it's not like, that's not how I start my process. It's more like pulling from the collection of images that I've taken and kind of working a narrative into them. And I think for me, the moodiness and like that tenderness comes from longing. And I think like this is my commute to work, and it's like on the LRT, and it's the scaffolding, and it's having those moments of like pause and reflection. And I think like bringing the digital kind of interference like with the overlaying grid in these images, and like this is like my arm linked with like an ex-boyfriend's, and it's like treated in the same way, and like suddenly environment space feels really similar to the body. And I think that relationship between treating the body and a space in a similar way really informs how you view the body, and in turn and really informs how you're viewing the spaces. So I think like that's the conversation that's kind of I'm trying to work through. And I think for me at least, it seems like the answer so far has been to use technology to bring that kind of conversation out. Because like with the webcam project that's like behind you, I was really excited about investigating and like looking at the body and different ways of like reasoning. And I think that like that's maybe how I connect with this works now a little bit even more so, is like that investigation and like analyzing and looking back. And I think looking at the body in that way and having this investigation really connect with, I guess, how I see the body in space. But the webcam, like the more you move, the more blurred you are, and like the longer you kind of investigate and look, and you kind of come into focus. But it starts to remember like where you are. So like I'm not here, or I'm blurry here, and then like where I've been sitting, I'm not as blurry. So I liked that idea where it would kind of like remember, and you would gotta keep looking.
Yeah, I had fun with this one at Fab.
Yeah.
Are you trying to like take it away from a very individual and personal narrative and kind of letting viewers and other people perhaps empathize with your experiences a bit more?
Definitely. I think that's one part of it. The other part for me, like the mirror and the snapshot that was on the floor, I was really trying to figure out a way that I can document the gallery. I was like, with the images that were like these images here, I was like focused on like having this like really meticulous documentation and like going through and creating this collection of images that had some kind of narrative or some kind of like story connected to them. And then I was putting them into a space that maybe wasn't connected to the story at all. So I really wanted to have, I like started photographing the gallery, and then I was like, I'm going to work with images of the gallery in the work. And that kind of went through a cycle and didn't really evolve into anything. And then I started like thinking about bringing in like architectural elements and like changing the space and to be part of the work. And that didn't happen. And then the mirror kind of felt like a natural progression to show the ceiling, because I wanted to continue that narrative that I was kind of talking about earlier, where the ceiling is that like moment of reflection and thinking. And I think putting it on the floor and having the mirror reflect the ceiling and the walls kind of made it more about the architecture of the space. So that was one part. And like with the webcam, I was really excited about having somebody investigate themselves, like look for themselves in a space. Because for me, when I saw myself in the MRI images, I was like so fascinated by how different I felt like I looked, or like seeing your insides and having that experience of like not recognizing.
Yeah.
Then it was like no hair, like going through your brain, and it was a really kind of foreign and bizarre. And I think that like I spent so many days just like going through each like slice of the MRI. The webcam for me, I was like, I want somebody to come into the space and kind of be like caught off guard by seeing themselves, because I think that was like, for me, the weirdest experience with the MRI was having to like sit and look at myself, you know? Hi, I'm Nicholas Hertz. I'm an artist living in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm sitting on my couch at my condo in Riverdale. I'm also a student advisor at the University of Alberta in the Department of Fine Arts. I think for me, I'm connected to the idea of like wanting to create, and I think like when we were just going through my work, I realized it's about investigating, and I think it's important for me to reason and kind of collect my thoughts in that way. And I think that the way I work, like photographic and working through writing and manipulating things digitally and like kind of having that process is, I think, really important to me because it connects to research creation and like working in a way that I'm allowed to investigate and have that freedom to explore. I feel like my work is, we kind of talked about the glitch as a way of like having it open so the viewers to kind of investigate. And I think the narratives that I'm kind of showing in the work are so open and so vague and wide. And I think in doing that, there's like a need for people to bring their own kind of experience to the work and kind of investigate with their own experience informing that investigation. And I think because of that, the work becomes a really wonderful site of conversation and for community to connect and for me to like meet people and then be like, oh, and I'm seeing this in this healing or I'm experiencing this with something. And I think it's a really wonderful site. But then also on the other side of that, I think in the creation, I think it's really important for me to connect with people and especially subjects that I'm photographing and working and are usually people that I have personal and close relationships with. So from that, the work is informed by those relationships kind of almost wholly. And it's, I think, really important. And then on another side of that, I think I'm really tied to working in a way that I can share as process. And I think that like connecting with like peers and friends with work that's maybe not done or ideas that aren't totally fleshed out, I think is a really important part of my process where I'm like, does this make sense? Like, what is what I'm doing, like connecting to anything? And they're like, no, this is terrible. And I'll scratch it or the opposite. And they're like, yeah, no, like I see that, but maybe. And it's like, so threefold answer to that question.
Yeah, it seems like you're collaborating with both the viewers through the work, like especially like the VR work, the webcam feedback, and even the mirrors, right?
Yeah.
But then you're also, of course, collaborating with other artists to make the work happen, right?
Oh, yeah.
With your recent work at Fab, it's
Yeah.
you're working with computer scientists.
Oh, yeah. Would not be possible without collaboration for sure, especially with like, my toolkit that I work with digitally is so limited. And like with the VR project, for example, it was like having to reason with audio is like a whole new ballpark and a whole kind of landscape that I'm not super familiar with. So that was getting the support needed to kind of make it functional and make it work was a whole other kind of group of people. Like the previous question about community, I think it's important to me, and I think it's the Art From Here project is a way of facilitating that connection and collaboration. And I also think it's a way for people to gain entry point in work that maybe they wouldn't outside of an institution or outside of a space where it exists kind of digitally. And like being able to, if somebody asks you like, what about your work, and being able to share a link where somebody has written about my work is like wonderful. It's like, it's not my words, it's my work, but it's somebody,
Right.
and it's like a nice entry point for somebody to understand and grapple with it.